What we found, using our definition of 12 kittens or more, was that we had 16 clusters for about, out of the 996 total kittens that we were able to map, 280 of those kittens were in clusters, and 716 were not in clusters. And I just, something that we probably should have recognized early on, one of these 16 clusters was the Tompkins County SPCA, not because we had kittens being born there, but because kittens were being dropped off there. And so we didn't really fully recognize it right away. So we had to pull that out of any further analyses that we did on the data. Okay. And so here are now, if we look at, and we still have the colors here, but what I really want you to focus on are the circles. So the bigger circles mean that somewhere between 20 and 28 kittens came to the shelter during that 3-year period. The smaller circle shows somewhere between 16 and 19 kittens came from that from that location, and then 13 to 15. So now we've got some much more manageable foci to work with. And the lovely thing, and then you can overlay the various towns. We have, how many, 14 towns? 16, no, about 15 towns? I don't know, 11, I don't know what it is. Billy, Jim, you'd know better than me, I should know, I don't. But one of the things we wanted to look at, because the staff at the shelter said, you know what, we think we get an awful lot of kittens from some of the trailer parks. And we don't know which ones they are necessarily off the top of our head, but you certainly have that impression. So one of the things we did look at here was land use, and these land use categories are in fact come out of the census. They're definitions that we didn't establish, but that are by other censuses. And we did it to get a sense of all of these, but we were particularly interested in the residential park, the trailer parks, because also as we looked at the map, you could tell knowing the community, you could look at that, and if you knew where the trailer parks were, a number of those clusters actually overlay trailer parks. So what we did was, just as a quick first glance, we said, well, let's just look at the total number of kittens versus the clusters and see if we can see any difference here. And lo and behold, one of those that stood out the most, what we're looking for is the difference here. The difference between, and we should have used, and you'll see in another analysis here, we really wanted to get the unclustered kittens and the clustered kittens, but this still tells the story here. That in fact we have a disproportionate number of these clusters coming from residential parks, or that is trailer parks, compared to non-trailer parks. And the other thing you can do with this, I mean, you now can, depending on how finely you want to take this down, you can actually, and in some cases we found literally a residence that was contributing kittens year after year. In other cases, it wasn't necessarily the residence, but rather an area. But you can use this information. This is just one small part of Ithaca, but showing the distribution in this neighborhood of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 different clusters. Happens to be also a relatively low income area in Ithaca. Just to illustrate here that not all of these necessarily occur in urban areas. This is a sort of this is a, what is it? It's a agricultural area. So this is an agricultural area. Probably, I didn't look it up, but I think it might be a residence there that even though they're relatively rurally located, they are producing more kittens than that fell within our definition. And then here's one, and this is just one of the trailer parks, but you can see that very definitely the trailer parks were at, in the next slide, they were at the highest risk. What we're doing here is saying, how much higher is the risk that you will have a cluster if you are in a residential park? So if you're in a residential park compared to a low density residential area, you're 16 times more likely to have a cluster of kittens. And the rest of it kind of makes sense too. High density residential area. You'd expect with more people, you're more likely to find clusters where there are more kittens coming from that area. I just wanted to point out that if you have data from over time, you could begin, we actually did this, as I mentioned earlier, from 2006 to 2008. And you can see, they don't necessarily, because people move, things change, but there are a number of areas where, in fact, over a 6-year period, the same thing was happening. So if you happen to be lucky enough to have the data longer term, and if you start doing it now in your own shelters, you could build a long-term map that would help you see what kind of progress you're making and get a sense of, what are perpetual sources of kittens and what are ones that just pop up and then disappear.